My name is Ryan Cole, and I never thought a few angry words could haunt me this way. I'm standing here, in the doorway of our guest room. The air is thick. It's heavy. It smells like her perfume, and something else. Something final. I can't breathe right in here. My chest is too tight. I have to tell you what happened. I have to get this out, or I think I might suffocate. It was a Sunday morning. One of those bright, sunny days that feels like it should be happy. It wasn't. My mother-in-law, Carol, had been living with us for 3 weeks. She said she was here to help after my wife, Sarah, had a minor surgery. But it didn't feel like help. It felt like an invasion. Every little thing started to grate on me. The way she'd hum in the kitchen at 6 a.m., the specific, loud way she'd chew her toast, the constant, unsolicited advice. Ryan, you should park the car the other way. Ryan, that shirt is a bit wrinkled, isn't it? It was 1,000 tiny paper cuts. And I was bleeding out, slowly. That morning, it was the coffee. I made my coffee a specific way. It's my one little ritual. I had the beans ground, the water measured. I turned around for 1 second to get a mug, and when I turned back, she was pouring my prepared grounds into a cheap, disposable filter. "It's just easier this way, dear," she said with a smile. I didn't yell right away. A quiet, dangerous calm settled over me first. I watched her pour the water, making a weak, bitter version of my coffee. I saw Sarah watching us from the kitchen table, her eyes tired. She saw the look on my face. She started to say, "Mom, maybe don't," but it was too late. I snapped. The dam broke. All those paper cuts opened into one giant wound. "Just stop." The words exploded out of me, louder than I intended. The room went silent. Sarah flinched. Carol's hand froze, the coffee carafe hovering mid-pour. "Stop what, Ryan?" she asked, her voice infuriatingly calm. "Everything, just everything. Your humming, your advice, your presence." I was gesturing wildly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "This is my house, my kitchen. That was my coffee. You don't get to just come in here and change everything." "Ryan, please," Sarah whispered, her voice pleading. But I was a freight train with no brakes. I turned all my fury, all my built-up resentment, directly onto Carol. I looked her right in the eye. My vision was blurry with anger. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice low and shaking. "I need you to get out of my house. Today, right now." She didn't cry. She didn't yell back. She just looked at me. Her eyes, usually so bright and busy, just went flat. It was like watching a light switch off inside someone. She looked at me for a long moment, then at Sarah, who had her face in her hands. "Okay, Ryan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay." She quietly put the carafe down. She didn't spill a drop. Then she turned and walked out of the kitchen. I stood there, my fists clenched, adrenaline making my hands tremble. I could hear Sarah crying softly. I felt a flicker of guilt, but it was drowned out by a fierce, ugly sense of victory. I had won. I had taken my house back. We heard her moving around in the guest room. The sound of drawers opening and closing, the quiet zip of a suitcase. It took her less than 15 minutes. She came back downstairs with her small, Carol, wheeled suitcase, the same one she'd arrived with. She didn't look at me. She went to Sarah, kissed her on the top of her head, and said, "I'll call you later, sweetheart." And then she walked out the front door. She didn't slam it. She closed it with a soft, precise click. The house was suddenly profoundly silent. The only sound was Sarah's ragged breathing. I stood there in the kitchen, the ghost of my shouted words hanging in the air. The smell of the ruined coffee was overwhelming. I had gotten what I wanted. The intruder was gone. So why did the silence feel so loud? Why did the air feel so heavy? I tried to take a deep breath, but my lungs wouldn't fully expand. I just stood there, listening to the empty house, feeling like the biggest man in the world and the smallest, all at the same time. I keep wondering how far this story will reach. I feel so alone in this quiet house. Comment below what city you're listening from, just so I know I'm not completely alone in this. The silence after she left was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Sarah wouldn't look at me. She got up from the table, her chair scraping against the tile, a sound that made me jump. She walked right past me, her shoulder brushing mine, and went upstairs without a word. I was left alone in the kitchen with the evidence of my explosion. The cheap filter was still in the coffee maker, the weak, bitter brew still dripping slowly into the glass carafe. The air smelled like betrayal and burnt coffee beans. I cleaned it up. I don't know why. It felt like the only thing I could control. I dumped the entire pot down the sink, the brown liquid swirling down the drain. I scrubbed the carafe until it shone, my hands shaking. I threw the disposable filter in the trash, burying it under other garbage so I wouldn't have to see it. I made a new pot, my way, with my beans and my permanent filter. But when I poured a cup, it tasted like ash. I couldn't drink it. I just stood at the counter, holding the warm mug, feeling the weight of what I'd done settle deep into my bones. The morning dragged on. The sun was too bright, streaming through the kitchen window, highlighting every dust particle dancing in the air. It felt mocking. I could hear Sarah moving around in our bedroom upstairs. A drawer would shut, the floor would creak. Normal, everyday sounds, but now they felt like accusations. I wanted to go up there. I wanted to apologize, to explain that it wasn't really about the coffee, that it was the constant feeling of being judged in my own home. But my pride was a cage. I stayed downstairs, pacing from the living room to the kitchen and back again. I tried to watch TV, but the noise was just meaningless static. I picked up a book, but the words swam on the page. All I could see was Carol's face, the moment the light went out of her eyes. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. It just said, she got a room at the extended stay on Route 9. That was it. No anger, no sadness, just a fact. A pin dropped on a map, showing me exactly where I'd sent her. The extended stay. It sounded so lonely. A place for people in transition, for people with no home. I put my phone down and stared out the window at our quiet suburban street. A kid was riding his bike. A neighbor was watering her flowers. Life was just going on, completely normal, while my world had tilted off its axis. Sarah came downstairs around 2. Her eyes were red and puffy, but her face was a calm, emotionless mask. She went to the fridge and got a bottle of water. She didn't look at me. "Sarah," I started, my voice rough. "Don't, Ryan," she said, cutting me off. She didn't say it angrily. She said it with a finality that was worse than any shout. "Just don't." She walked into the living room and sat on the far end of the couch, tucking her feet under her. She picked up her knitting, a blanket she'd been working on for weeks, and her hands started moving, the needles clicking together in a steady, rhythmic sound. It was a sound I usually found comforting. Now, it was the only sound in the house, and it felt like a timer counting down to something terrible. I sat in the armchair across from her. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I didn't know what to say. The space between us, just 10 feet of carpet, felt like a canyon. I had wanted my space back, my quiet, my peace, and now I had it. It was the most uncomfortable, suffocating peace I had ever known. I could feel every beat of my own heart. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I could smell the faint, lingering trace of Carol's perfume from where she'd sat on the couch just yesterday. It was a floral scent, something light. Now it smelled like guilt. I must have dozed off, the adrenaline crash finally hitting me. The next thing I knew, the light in the room had changed. It was that late afternoon gold, casting long shadows across the floor. Sarah was still on the couch, her knitting in her lap, but she was staring out the window, not moving. The clicking had stopped. The silence was absolute. And then her phone rang. The sound was so shrill, so violently out of place in the quiet house, that we both jumped. It was on the coffee table between us. We both looked at it. The screen lit up, and I saw the caller ID. It was Mom. Sarah looked at the phone. Then she looked at me. Her calm mask shattered. In her eyes, I saw a flicker of hope. Maybe Carol was calling to say it was okay. Maybe she was calling to tell me off. Maybe this could be the start of fixing it. She reached for the phone, her hand trembling slightly. She swiped to answer and put it to her ear. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice soft, tentative. I watched her face. I saw the hope in her eyes, bright and fragile. And then I saw it die. It didn't fade. It was extinguished, instantly, completely. Her face went slack. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale as a ghost. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her hand, the one holding the phone, just dropped. It fell from her ear and hit the carpet with a dull thud. I could hear a tiny, frantic voice, still coming from the speaker on the floor. "Sarah?" I said, standing up. "Sarah, what is it?" She didn't look at me. She was staring at nothing, her eyes wide with a horror I couldn't comprehend. She brought her hands up to her mouth, as if to trap a scream inside. "Sarah, talk to me." My voice was rising in panic. "Who was that? Was that your mom?" She slowly shook her head, her hands still pressed to her lips. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She took a shaky breath, and when she finally spoke, her voice was a broken whisper, a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. "That was the police," she said. The words were quiet, but they hit me with the force of a physical blow. There was an incident at the hotel. My blood ran cold. An incident? What kind of incident? Is she okay? Sarah finally turned her head to look at me. Her eyes were bottomless pools of pain. "They found her, Ryan." A sob caught in her throat. They said she wasn't breathing. The world stopped. The air was sucked out of the room. I couldn't process the words. Wasn't breathing. It didn't compute. It was a phrase from a movie, from a news report about strangers. It wasn't something connected to the woman who had been humming in my kitchen just hours ago. What was all I could manage? A stupid, useless word. "She's gone, Ryan." Sarah's voice was hollow, empty. My mom is gone. And in that moment, standing in my living room, with the late afternoon sun pouring in, I knew. I knew with a certainty that turned my bones to ice. My words hadn't just hurt her feelings. They hadn't just sent her to a lonely hotel room. My angry, hateful, victorious words had chased her into a silence from which there was no return. I had told her to leave, and she had. And now, she was gone forever. The click of the front door closing that morning hadn't been an ending. It had been the beginning of this new, unbearable reality where the air was too thick to breathe and the silence was filled with the echo of my own voice, screaming at a woman who was no longer here to hear it. The drive to the hotel was a blur. I don't remember getting in the car. I don't remember starting the engine. 1 minute I was standing in my living room, the world tilting on its axis, and the next I was behind the wheel, my hands gripping it so tight my knuckles were white. Sarah was in the passenger seat, completely silent. She wasn't crying anymore. She was just staring out the window, her body rigid. She hadn't looked at me once since she said the words. She wasn't breathing. The police had told her to come to the extended stay. They needed a formal identification. My mind was racing, trying to fill in the blanks they hadn't given her over the phone. An incident. What did that mean? Did she slip in the shower? Did she have a heart attack? A part of me, a desperate, cowardly part, was praying for a medical event. Something natural, something that couldn't possibly be my fault. The hotel came into view. It was a bland, beige building off the highway, the kind of place you see but never really notice. There were 2 police cruisers parked haphazardly near the entrance, their light bars off, but their presence screaming that something was terribly wrong. I pulled into a spot far away from them, my heart hammering against my ribs. I killed the engine. The silence in the car was heavier than any sound. "Sarah," I started, my voice a dry croak. She was out of the car before I could finish, her door slamming shut with a finality that made me flinch. I scrambled out after her. We walked towards the entrance, the distance feeling like a mile. A uniformed officer was standing by the glass doors. He saw us approaching, his face a mask of professional sympathy. He held the door open for Sarah. "Ma'am, are you Sarah Cole?" he asked gently. She just nodded, unable to speak. "I'm Officer Miller. We spoke on the phone." He glanced at me, a question in his eyes. "I'm her husband," I said, the words feeling like a lie. He gave a tight nod and led us inside. The lobby was cheaply furnished, with worn carpet and a faint smell of stale coffee and cleaning products. It was so ordinary, so painfully normal. How could something so terrible happen in a place like this? He led us not to the front desk, but down a long, dimly lit hallway on the ground floor. The air grew colder with every step. I could see another officer standing outside a door at the far end. Room 114. The number was etched in cheap gold plastic. My feet felt like they were made of lead. Sarah was walking ahead of me, her shoulders squared, but I could see the fine tremors running through her body. As we got closer, the officer by the door stepped aside. The door was slightly ajar. From inside, I could hear low, murmuring voices. Officer Miller stopped Sarah before she could enter. "Ma'am, I need to prepare you. It's not a pleasant sight. The medical examiner is with her now. You don't have to go in if you don't feel you can." Sarah's voice was steel. "She's my mother. I have to." He nodded, his respect for her evident. He pushed the door open slowly. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was a mix of that floral perfume she always wore and something else. Something metallic and sour. The smell of death. I froze in the doorway, my body refusing to go further. But Sarah took one step inside, and then she stopped dead. The room was a small, standard hotel room. A bed, a nightstand, a cheap wooden desk. Her small wheeled suitcase was standing upright by the desk, unopened. It looked so lonely. And then I saw her. Carol was on the floor, halfway between the bed and the bathroom. She was on her side, curled almost into a fetal position. She was still wearing the light blue sweater and slacks she had left our house in. One of her shoes was off. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. Her face was pale, waxy. A small, dark pool of vomit had dried on the carpet near her mouth. A man in a windbreaker, the medical examiner, was kneeling beside her, making notes on a clipboard. He looked up as we entered, his expression grim. Sarah made a small choked sound in the back of her throat. It was the sound of a soul breaking. Her hands flew to her mouth again, and her entire body began to shake. She didn't scream. She just stood there, trembling, her eyes locked on her mother's lifeless form. I couldn't look away from Carol's face, those empty eyes. I kept waiting for her to blink, to sit up and say this was all some horrible, twisted joke. But she didn't move. The finality of it was a physical weight on my chest. This was real. She was really gone. Officer Miller gently guided Sarah back a step, turning her away from the direct view. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry for your loss." "What happened?" I heard myself ask. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. The medical examiner stood up. "Preliminary assessment points to a mixed drug intoxication. We found empty prescription bottles in the bathroom, amitriptyline and clonazepam, her own prescriptions, according to the labels. It appears she took a significant quantity with a large amount of alcohol." He gestured to the nightstand, where an empty bottle of cheap vodka stood next to a plastic water glass. My eyes darted from the vodka bottle to her suitcase to her body on the floor. She checked in, went to her room, and didn't even unpack. She just did it. The timeline unfolded in my head with brutal, horrifying clarity. She left our house, drove here, checked into this sad, lonely room, and ended her life, all in the span of a few hours. She was on medication for anxiety," Sarah whispered, her voice ragged. "For years. She never would have." But her sentence trailed off, because the unspoken truth was hanging in the toxic air of that room. She never would have, until today. Until I screamed at her. Until I told her she wasn't wanted. Until I made her feel like a burden in her own daughter's home. I looked at Carol's face one more time, and I saw it not as it was now, but as it was this morning in my kitchen. The moment the light went out of her eyes, it wasn't just hurt I had seen. It was a profound, absolute defeat, and I had caused it. I had handed her the final crushing blow. The wave of nausea so violent hit me that I stumbled back into the hallway, my hand slapping against the wall for support. I bent over, sure I was going to be sick, but nothing came up, just dry, heaving gasps. The images flashed behind my eyes, me yelling, her quiet "okay," the click of the door, and now this. This was the consequence. This was the end of the path I had set her on. I heard Sarah talking to the officer, her voice a monotone of shock. She was giving him information, next of kin, her father's phone number, the practical, horrible tasks that follow a death. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the sight burned into my brain, the sight of my mother-in-law on a cheap hotel carpet, dead by her own hand, because I couldn't control my temper over a pot of coffee. The officer handed Sarah a card, said something about the coroner's office and releasing the body. It was all a muffled roar in my ears. All I could hear was my own voice, echoing from this morning, twisting into a taunt. "I need you to get out of my house." She got out, and she kept going, right out of this world. And I was left here, in this horrible hallway, the smell of her death clinging to my clothes, to my skin, to the inside of my lungs. I had wanted my house back. I had wanted the silence. And now I had a silence so profound, so absolute, that I knew I would never, ever be able to fill it. The drive home from the extended stay was the longest of my life. The silence in the car was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Sarah sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, her head turned to the window, watching the streetlights blur past. She hadn't spoken a word since we left that room, not one. I kept glancing at her, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I wanted to say something, anything, to break this awful quiet. "I'm sorry" felt like the most useless, pathetic phrase in the English language. It was a pebble thrown into a canyon. It wouldn't even make a sound. I pulled into our driveway and cut the engine. Our house looked different. The worn, yellow light from the porch lamp, which usually felt so welcoming, now felt like it was accusing me. This was the house she was told to leave. This was the safe place she was banished from. Sarah got out of the car and walked to the front door, her movements slow and robotic. She unlocked it and went inside, not holding it open for me. I sat there for a full minute, just staring at the closed door, gathering the courage to face what was on the other side. When I finally walked in, the air hit me like a wall. It still smelled faintly of her perfume. That light, floral scent was now the smell of a ghost. Sarah was already upstairs. I heard our bedroom door click shut. Not a slam, just a soft, definitive click. A boundary being drawn. I was exiled to the downstairs, to the scene of the crime. I walked into the living room. The blanket she'd been knitting was still on the couch, a tangle of yarn and needles, abandoned mid-stitch. I picked it up. The wool was soft. I could almost feel the residual warmth from her hands. I dropped it like it had burned me. My eyes landed on the spot on the carpet where her phone had fallen. I could still see the impression. That was the exact spot where our old life ended. I couldn't stand it. I went into the kitchen, thinking I'd make some coffee, do something normal. And there it was, the source of the whole argument. The French press, clean and empty, sitting on the counter. I saw it all over again. Me, storming in here, annoyed that she was cluttering my counter. Her, trying to explain it made better coffee. My voice, rising. Her face, falling. It was about coffee. We destroyed our family over coffee. I opened the fridge to get some water, and my heart stopped. On the top shelf, wrapped in plastic, was a piece of coffee cake. Carol had bought it yesterday. She'd said, "I know you like this, Ryan." She was always doing little things like that, trying to connect, trying to help. And I had thrown every single gesture back in her face. I took the cake out, my hands trembling. I carried it to the trash can, lifted the lid, and just stared at it. I couldn't do it. Throwing it away felt like throwing her away all over again. I put it back in the fridge, the sight of it making my stomach churn. I wandered back into the living room and sank into the armchair. The house was so quiet. Before she came, I loved the quiet. I craved it after a long day. Now the silence was deafening. It was a heavy, judgmental silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the appliance, felt like it was whispering her name. Carol, Carol, Carol. I thought about the hotel room, the way she was curled on the floor. She must have been in so much pain. A kind of pain I couldn't even imagine. A pain I created. I kept picturing her in that room, alone, taking the pills, drinking the vodka. Did she think about Sarah? Did she think about me? Did she hate me in those final moments? I hoped she did. I deserved her hate. The alternative, that she was just too broken to feel anything at all, was somehow worse. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I replayed every single interaction from the past few weeks. Every time I sighed heavily when she offered advice. Every time I gave a short, clipped answer to her questions. Every time I made her feel like a guest, a nuisance, in her own daughter's home. I had built this, brick by brick, with my own resentment and impatience. I had constructed the prison she felt she needed to escape from, permanently. Around midnight, I heard a sound from upstairs. A muffled, gut-wrenching sob. It was the first sound I'd heard from Sarah in hours. It was raw and full of a grief so deep it seemed to shake the whole house. I stood up, my instinct to go to her, to comfort my wife. I took 2 steps towards the stairs and stopped. My feet wouldn't move. What right did I have to comfort her? I was the reason she was crying. I was the monster in her story. Going up there would be an invasion, a violation. So I just stood there at the bottom of the stairs, listening to my wife's heart break, knowing I was the one who swung the hammer. I stood there until the sobs subsided into a quiet, hopeless weeping, and then into silence again. I didn't sleep. I sat in that dark living room, watching the shadows move across the walls as cars passed by outside. I was afraid to close my eyes. Every time I did, I saw her face, both faces, the living one from my kitchen and the waxy, lifeless one from the hotel floor. They kept merging into one horrible image. I was a prisoner in my own home, tortured by the memories I myself had created. I had wanted my space, my peace, my quiet, and I got it. I got all the space in the world, an infinite, cold, empty space between me and the woman I loved, with the ghost of her mother forever standing between us. The sun began to rise, painting the room in a soft, gray light. A new day, a day without Carol in it, the first of thousands. I looked around the room. Everything was in its place. The couch, the TV, the bookshelf. It all looked the same, but it was all different. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a museum of my worst mistake, a tomb for the family we used to be. And I was the caretaker, condemned to walk these halls forever, listening for echoes of a voice I'd sworn I never wanted to hear again. I sat in that gray dawn light for what felt like years. My body was stiff, my eyes gritty and raw. I could still smell the hotel room on my clothes. That metallic, sour smell had woven itself into the fibers of my sweater. I pulled the collar up over my nose and inhaled, and a fresh wave of nausea rolled through me. This was my new perfume, the scent of my guilt. I heard the floorboards creak upstairs. Sarah was awake. My heart started to hammer again, a frantic, panicked rhythm. What do you say? What do you do? How do you face the person whose world you helped destroy? I stood up, my joints protesting, and went to the kitchen. I needed to do something normal. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove. My hands were shaking so badly I sloshed water all over the counter. I stared at the puddle, remembering the way Carol would quietly wipe up spills with a dish towel, always trying to be helpful, to be neat. I grabbed a paper towel and mopped it up, my movements jerky. The kettle whistled, a shrill sound that made me jump. I poured the boiling water into a mug, dunked a tea bag in and out. I didn't even like tea. Carol drank tea. I was doing this for her, or for the ghost of her, and the thought was so pathetic, I almost threw the mug against the wall. I heard Sarah's footsteps on the stairs, slow, heavy. Each step was a countdown to a moment I wasn't ready for. I stood frozen by the counter, clutching the hot mug, waiting. She appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing the same clothes from yesterday, now wrinkled. Her face was pale and puffy, her eyes swollen to slits. She looked 10 years older. She looked like a stranger. She didn't look at me. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the empty spot where the French press usually sat. I had put it away in a cupboard last night, out of sight. A useless, cowardly gesture. She walked to the fridge and opened it. She stood there for a long moment, just staring inside. I knew what she was looking at. The coffee cake. I held my breath. She reached in, her hand hovering over the wrapped plate. Then she slowly closed the fridge door without taking anything. She turned, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, and finally her gaze landed on me. It wasn't anger I saw. It was worse. It was a hollow, bottomless emptiness. A complete and total void where my wife used to be. The funeral home called my cell phone, she said. Her voice was flat, scraped raw. While you were sitting down here, they need me to go down there, today, to make arrangements. I'll come with you, I said immediately, the words tumbling out too fast. Just tell me when. I'll drive you. She shook her head slowly, a barely perceptible movement. No, that one word was a door slamming in my face. Sarah, please, let me help you. Let me be there for you. Why? She asked, and the simple question felt like a knife to the chest. So you can feel better? This isn't about you feeling better, Ryan. This is about me burying my mother. I flinched. I know that. I want to support you. Shh. You supported me right into this, she whispered, her voice cracking on the last word. She looked away, out the window over the sink. I can't look at you right now. I see you and all I hear is you yelling at her. I see you and all I can picture is her alone in that room. I felt the truth of her words like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. There was no arguing with it. It was the reality I had built. I am so sorry, I choked out. It was inadequate. It was nothing. I know you are, she said, still not looking at me. But your sorry doesn't bring her back. Your sorry doesn't change the fact that the last thing my mother heard from this family was that she wasn't wanted. She walked out of the kitchen then. I heard her go back upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard the shower turn on. I stood there, alone with the steam from my untouched tea, listening to the water run. I imagined it, washing the hotel smell off her, washing away the long night. But I knew some things don't wash off. They stain you forever. An hour later, she came back down, dressed in a simple black dress. Her hair was wet. She had her purse and car keys in her hand. I'm going to my dad's first, she said, her voice still that terrifying monotone. Then we're going to the funeral home together. Your dad, what did you tell him? I asked, dreading the answer. A flicker of something, pain, anger, crossed her face. I told him there was an argument, that she was upset. I didn't tell him what you said. Not yet. The not yet hung in the air between us, a ticking time bomb. Her father, a quiet, kind man who had always treated me like a son. How would he look at me when he knew? She walked to the front door and paused, her hand on the knob. She didn't turn around. The silence you wanted, she said, so softly I almost didn't hear it. I hope it was worth it. Then she opened the door and walked out. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I was alone. Truly, completely alone. I looked around the empty house. The quiet I had craved so much was now a roaring in my ears. It was a vacuum, sucking all the life and warmth out of the world. I had gotten everything I thought I wanted. A house without my mother-in-law in it. The peace and quiet to make my coffee my own way. I walked over to the cupboard and took out the French press. I held the cool glass in my hands. I remembered her patiently showing me how to do it. The grounds, the hot water, the 4-minute wait. It tastes more alive, Ryan, she had said. I had just shrugged, annoyed by the extra steps. I made a pot. I followed her steps exactly. When it was ready, I poured a cup and took a sip. It was richer, deeper. It was, without a doubt, better coffee. And the taste of it, the perfect, alive taste of it, made me sicker than anything ever had. Because she was right about the coffee, about so many things. And I was too much of a selfish, impatient bastard to ever listen. I poured the entire pot down the sink, watching the dark liquid swirl down the drain. It felt like I was pouring a part of her away, and I couldn't stand it. I was drowning in this silence, in this empty, perfect house. I had won my argument, and in doing so, I had lost everything that ever mattered. The days that followed were a blur of gray. Sarah stayed at her dad's house. I was alone in the museum of my mistake. I didn't go to work. I didn't answer my phone. I just wandered from room to room, tracing the ghost of Carol's presence. The silence was no longer quiet. It was a scream. The funeral was on a Thursday. It drizzled, a fine cold mist that clung to everything. I put on my only black suit and stood in front of the mirror. The man staring back was a stranger. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped under a weight only he could feel. I drove to the funeral home alone. My palms were so wet they slipped on the steering wheel. I parked at the far end of the lot, my engine cutting into a silence that felt heavier than any sound. I saw Sarah's car near the entrance. Her father's car was beside it. I didn't get out. I just watched the people file in. Distant relatives, friends of Carol's, all these people whose lives she had touched. I was the man who had untouched it. I saw Sarah and her father walk inside. He had his arm around her, holding her up. She was leaning into him, a black veil over her face. She looked so small, so broken, and I was the one who had broken her. I sat in that car for 20 minutes after the service was supposed to start. The coward's choice. I couldn't face them. I couldn't walk into that room and see the casket, see the pictures of her smiling face, see the judgment in everyone's eyes. My guilt was a cage, and I was locked inside my own car. But then I thought of Carol, not the woman on the hotel floor, but the woman who bought me coffee cake, the woman who tried to teach me how to make better coffee, the woman who loved my wife more than anything. She deserved for me to be there, even if I had to sit in the back row, even if everyone hated me. I forced the car door open and walked across the wet asphalt. Each step felt like I was walking through cement. The doors of the funeral home were heavy, ornate wood. I pulled one open and slipped inside. The air was thick with the smell of flowers and old perfume. A low, somber music played. The room was full. I stood at the back, my back pressed against the wall, trying to make myself invisible. And then I saw it, at the front of the room. The closed casket, a simple dark wood. A large portrait of Carol was placed beside it. She was smiling, her eyes crinkled at the corners. She looked happy. She looked alive. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe. I had done that. I had turned that vibrant, living woman into a picture, into a box. My eyes found Sarah. She was in the front row, her head bowed. Her father sat stiffly beside her, his hand on her back. He hadn't seen me yet. The service was a haze of kind words and soft crying. People stood and shared stories. Stories about her kindness, her laugh, her love for gardening. Every story was a fresh cut, a reminder of what was gone, of what I had erased. Then it was over. People began to stand, to mill about, to offer quiet condolences to the family. I stayed frozen against the wall. I saw Sarah's father turn. His eyes scanning the room. They landed on me. His face, usually so warm and open, hardened. It didn't twist in anger. It just shut down. He knew. Sarah must have told him everything. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he turned away, deliberately putting his body between me and his daughter. The message was clear. I was not family anymore. Sarah stood up. She turned around, her veil off now. Her eyes were red-rimmed and empty. They swept across the room and found me. For a second, we just looked at each other across a sea of mourners. There was no connection, no recognition. It was like she was looking through me, at a stain on the wall. She turned and walked away, following her father out a side door. She didn't look back. I stood there until the room was empty, until it was just me and the funeral director, who gave me a sympathetic, questioning look. I just shook my head and walked out. I drove home. The house was exactly as I had left it. Silent, perfect, empty. A week passed, then another. Sarah didn't come home. She didn't call. The only sign she'd been there was a single suitcase, packed with some of her clothes, that appeared in the foyer one afternoon while I was at the store. She didn't even want to see me to get her things. I existed in a state of suspension. I went back to work because I had to. I answered emails. I went through the motions. But I was a ghost. The guilt wasn't a sharp pain anymore. It was a constant, dull ache, a new part of my anatomy. The guilt bone, the regret organ. I kept expecting a lawyer's letter, a divorce petition, some official, final word. It didn't come. Then one evening, the doorbell rang. My heart leaped into my throat. Sarah. It had to be Sarah. I rushed to the door and pulled it open. It wasn't Sarah. It was her father, Frank. He stood on my porch, his hands shoved in the pockets of his windbreaker. The mist from the funeral day seemed to still be clinging to him. "Frank," I said, my voice a croak. "Ryan." He didn't smile. He just looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. "Can I come in?" I stepped back, my mind racing. This was it. He was here to tell me it was over, to deliver the news himself. He walked into the living room and didn't sit down. He stood by the couch, looking at Carol's abandoned knitting. "Sarah's staying with me for a while," he said, his voice low and even. "Indefinitely, I think." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "She told me what happened," he said. He finally looked at me. "The argument, what you said." I looked at the floor. "I know there's nothing I can say, Frank. I'm so sorry." "I know you are," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Carol?" She struggled, for a long time, with depression. After her own mother passed, it was a dark time. Sarah was probably too young to remember how bad it got. I looked up, confused. What was he saying? "I'm not telling you this to make you feel better," you said firmly, holding my gaze. "What you did was cruel. You kicked a woman when she was down. You made her feel unwanted in her daughter's home. There's no excuse for that." "I know," I whispered. "But," he continued, his voice softening just a fraction, "the choice she made, that was her choice, Ryan. It was a choice made in a sick, dark place. A place I'd hoped she'd never go back to. You lit the match, son. But the fire was already there, waiting." I stood there, letting his words sink in. They didn't absolve me. Nothing could. But they shifted the weight, just a little. It wasn't all mine to carry. The burden was shared, with a disease I never knew was there. "She loved you, you know," Frank said, his eyes glistening. "She was always talking about you. Ryan this, Ryan that. She just wanted to be part of your life. She was trying to find her way in." I felt a sob build in my chest, and I choked it down. "Sarah," I managed to say. Is there any chance?" Frank sighed, a long, weary sound. "I don't know. It's deep. She's not the girl you married right now. She may never be again. You have to understand that. You have to give her the space to decide if she can ever look at you without seeing her mother's last day." He turned to leave. He paused at the door and looked back at me. "Get some help, Ryan. For the anger, for the guilt. You can't live in this house with all these ghosts. It'll eat you alive." Then he was gone. I stood in the quiet for a long time. His words echoed in the silence. You lit the match, but the fire was already there. It didn't fix anything. Carol was still gone. Sarah was still gone. My life was still in ruins. But for the first time since that Sunday morning, I felt a tiny, fragile spark of something other than pure self-hatred. It was clarity. I had been a selfish jerk. I had been impatient and unkind. I had said the worst possible thing to a vulnerable woman. My actions had consequences, catastrophic ones, but I wasn't a murderer. I was a flawed, broken man who made a terrible, terrible mistake. I walked upstairs. I stood outside our bedroom door for a minute, Then I pushed it open. It smelled like Sarah's perfume and dust. The bed was perfectly made. It looked like a hotel room. I didn't go in. I just looked. Then I went to the guest room. I hadn't set foot in it since she left. I turned the knob and walked inside. The bed was made here too. The air was still, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It just felt empty, ready for someone new, or ready to be something else, an office, a gym, or maybe just a room that stayed empty for a while. I didn't know what would happen with Sarah. Frank was right. That was her choice to make, in her own time. I couldn't rush it. I couldn't fix it with an apology. All I could do was work on the man in the mirror, the one with the hollow eyes. I had to learn to live with what I'd done. I had to learn to make peace with the silence I'd created. I had wanted my house back, and in the most horrible way imaginable, I got it. The question now was, what was I going to build in this empty space? I had no answers. Only the quiet and the resolve to finally, truly listen to it. If you've ever felt a regret so deep it changes who you are, if you understand this kind of silence, let me know I'm not alone. Leave a comment with your city. And if this story stuck with you, please like, comment, and subscribe.